Okay, hi folks. My name is Raju Vyas. I'm a member of the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers, and specifically I'm on the Politically Aware Committee. And I'm just delighted to have all of you with us today for a webinar with some of the brightest community leaders in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, in which we hope to address homelessness and its related issues, to include criminal justice reform, property taxes, and other issues, as I mentioned, that are related to homelessness and COVID-19 and the very unique environment that we find ourselves in. So I'd like to first of all welcome everyone. This should be a lot of fun. It should be laid back. Before we get started and before I jump in with some biographies of the folks that are with us today, I'd just like to go over a couple of housekeeping matters. First, this course is eligible for CLE. The course number is 174090340, and you could look at the most recent weekly brief that Sherry Harris sends out, and that information is contained there as well. And also, if you have any questions for the panelists as we start this webinar, feel free to put them in the chat box, and my colleague Maria Garrett and I will monitor those and try to get as many questions answered as possible. So Maria, before I introduce our distinguished guests, do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about the committees that you work for?
Yes, thank you, Raju. And first of all, thank you to our panelists and our moderator for helping us put this amazing event on, and thank you for everyone for joining us. My name is Maria Garrett. I am an associate at DLA Piper, and I am a co-chair of the Aid to the Homeless Committee. You might see all the events that we put on throughout the year through the daily brief and our Facebook marketing. We have recently been doing a lot of Zoom events where we make sandwiches and we take them down to the soup mobile to feed our homeless community. We participate in the homeless count every year, so we typically have about one event a month where we really try to help our community. So we really hope that this event will inspire everyone to attend one or a few of those events.
Great, thanks Maria. And I should have clarified that if you have any questions and answers for the group, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, not the chat feature. I think I misspoke about that. And also Maria, you make a good point. I should probably introduce myself a little bit more than what committee I'm with. I'm an attorney here in Dallas. I'm a judge advocate in the Air Force, and I'm also a prosecutor with the Department of Defense, where I primarily handle contract fraud claims on behalf of the DoD against defense contractors. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our distinguished panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Judge Paula Rosales. She's the presiding judge at Dallas County Court Law Number 4, and she's going to serve as our moderator today. Judge Rosales, thank you so much for being here. Also, we have Ellen Magnus. She's the president and CEO of Family Gateway, which is a nonprofit which provides stability and life-changing support services to children and families affected by homelessness, and is the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance's designated access point for families experiencing or near homelessness in Dallas County. Family Gateway uses national best practice strategies for assessment and diversion, and also ensures that families seeking shelter are matched with the appropriate intervention. We also have Kara Mendelson. Kara is a Dallas City Council member, District 12. Kara, thank you so much for being here. Kara has been a lifelong advocate for children and communities and is a recognized leader of many service organizations in the greater Dallas area, to include the executive director of Rebuilding Together North Texas, a nonprofit serving Dallas, Collin, Denton, and Tarrant counties with free home repair for low-income seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, and families. Next, we have Michelle Heron. Michelle, thank you so much for being here. Michelle is an in-house counsel for City Square, a nonprofit which offers comprehensive social services to address 4 key areas related to the persistence of poverty, including hunger, health, housing, and hope. And also with us is Ed Eason. Ed also works for City Square and is the Assistant Vice President of Housing. He oversees all of City Square's housing projects and manages all of City Square's housing grants with HUD, the City of Dallas, and Dallas County. So if there's anything that you probably gleaned already just by the intros, is that we have an exceptional panel with deep expertise both strategically and locally as it relates to this issue. And with that said, Judge, I'm going to hand it over to you, and Maria and I will chime in as needed. And we encourage everyone to have fun, ask questions, and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Judge Paula Rosales, the presiding judge of Dallas County Court at Law Number 4, and I am your moderator today. I want to thank Maria Garrett and Raju Viaz, as well as the DAYL Aid to the Homeless and Politically Aware Committees for asking me to moderate this very meaningful panel. Today, you will hear from subject matter experts on a matter that I have called a social crisis or a societal contract crisis, homelessness. And before we get to hear from this fantastic group of panelists, I wanted to share with you how I first became aware that Dallas was no exception to the homelessness crisis. Having worked to combat human rights violations as an official or as a volunteer, and having been raised by two human rights advocates and lawyers, I was always keenly aware that injustice, marginalized communities, hunger, poverty, and inequality was a stain that damaged democracies throughout our planet. So I'm very sorry to say that it was not until I began serving as a City of Dallas Municipal Court judge back in 2012 that I became aware that Dallas had a chronic homelessness problem. I was well into my first week as a jail magistrate when I quickly noted that more than one defendant would give out the 1818 Corsicana address as their mailing address. A great percentage of these individuals were arrested and jailed after they failed to follow a previous order from a judge, in order to complete community service or for work release hours. The underlying offenses they had been found guilty of ranged anywhere from sleeping in a public place to trespassing, jaywalking, disturbing the peace, and urinating and defecating in a public place. Now, of course, the impactful sight of their lack of clothing and their appearance was shocking in and of itself. But most impactful to me was the evidence of their fragile mental state. Over the course of several months, I realized that thousands of these defendants have very similar stories. And it became imperative for me to understand, one, who was at 1818 Corsicana. Two, whether or not the underlying health issues that these defendants presented with could be addressed or cured. And three, whether or not I, as a judge, could do anything to help. And I found out that 1818 Corsicana is the address of the Bridge, the Homelessness Recovery Center. I also found that City Square and Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, represented today by our panelists, are key providers of housing and partners to shelters across our city. And I found that judges can be part of the solution or facilitate a solution. Many times by creating specialty dockets, which I did, and I labeled the Fresh Start docket. But it is important to note that success of these specialty dockets depends on everyone's buy-in. Judge colleagues, defendants, city prosecutors, law school programs, nonprofits, pro bono attorneys, public defenders, social workers, businesses, community members, and executive branches. Indeed, it takes a village. At present, as a county court at law judge who hears evictions appeals from JP courts, I am daily confronted with a very human question. Where will this family go when I find that this eviction must proceed? With that, I would like to ask the panelists if they can share with us how they received their calling to help to alleviate homelessness. And I would like to start with Ms. Magnus, please.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Well, I think my calling came early on to want to help others. I will tell you that I left my house when I was 17. I was married by the time I was 18 and had 2 babies right back to back, and then divorced. And so I was a single parent, and I became dangerously close to being homeless. Dangerously close. One thing after another would happen, and I would find myself without the appropriate support structure, so that I had to rebuild that myself. And so one of the things that I decided on as I went to college and got my undergraduate and master's degree was that if I was going to spend my life working, that it would be in service to others. And so I think I have a special kinship with the families who we serve, because I know they're no different than me.
Thank you for sharing. And I see that Councilwoman Mendelson is back. Ms. Mendelson, if you could please share with us your calling.
You bet. Sorry, I had a couple of tech issues this morning. You know, for me, I have always had interest in poverty issues, but it really wasn't until I was the PTA president, not of a local school, but actually over all of the school districts. So it was Plano ISD, which many people are shocked to find out half of my district is in Plano ISD. And I was the PTA president of the council, which is 36,000 members, 69 different PTAs. And what happened is we had quite a few PTAs that served mostly low-income families. And there were 3 PTAs that were dealing with homelessness. And I said, well, we got to help the people, right? So when I talked to the school district about what resources were available, they said, we have nothing. Called the mayor, and I said, hey, what have you got? I've got 2 families essentially who are homeless because of family violence. I've got a family who's homeless because of economic circumstances, and then a family had just been evicted. And they said, well, we don't have anything like that. You should call the school district, which we already knew had nothing. So eventually the mayor said, you know, you should go to this Collin County Homeless Coalition meeting. It just started. They may have an answer for you. And I went to that meeting, and it was a terrible meeting. And I just sat in the back and went, wow, these people are complaining, and they just need therapy because they are not getting anything done. And as a person who was teaching others how to run meetings, I was kind of shocked. So I went back the next month, and it was the same exact meeting. And I went back the 3rd month, and finally I said, y'all do anything? Like, you need to actually step up and serve people. And so I became the chair of the Collin County Homeless Coalition. At some point, I ended up a director for Samaritan Inn, which is the largest homeless shelter in Collin County. And I served on MDHA's leadership committee for 2 years. I was on the mayor's task force for homelessness. I was on the bond committee in 2017. I was the vice chair for the Citizen Homeless Commission for the city of Dallas before, becoming a city council member. So I've worked on this issue both professionally and as a volunteer. In between there, I was also the president of one of the largest mental health service agencies in town, which obviously dealt a lot with poverty issues and homelessness. So the issue is really important to me. I know a lot of people who've been homeless. I think that there's a lot to be done, and I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. It's not the first time I've talked with the Dallas Young Lawyers Association, and y'all are really important to this conversation. So I'm glad that you're interested, and I'm glad you're here for it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mendelson. Mr. Eason.
Yes, thank you, Judge Rosales, and thank you to the Dallas Young Lawyers Association for hosting this today. We appreciate, I've followed your work for over a decade now, and appreciate the work that you're doing all over our city. For me, it all started in around 1997. My boss, Larry James, and I I was a volunteer for City Square at the time, and we were about to apply for our first application for funding for permanent supportive housing in Dallas through the Continuum of Care. And Larry wanted me to come take some pictures for him because he was trying to raise some money like he's always doing and that kind of thing. And so we went out to an open field in the Cedars, just south of downtown. And I took some pictures. And in the process, I felt like it was awfully invasive of me to take pictures of people who were experiencing homelessness without getting their permission. So I went over and engaged some of the individuals. And before that conversation was over, they just said to me how much they appreciated someone listening. They said they go to various places looking for assistance and they get talked to quite a bit, but not very many people take the time to listen. And I began to realize just how powerful listening and giving attention to people who are in distress can be. I also learned that homelessness is extremely complicated and solving is complicated. And I learned that it's got to start with a system, a homeless response system, where people are coordinating together, working together, and being held accountable for action together. And so that's what I've been dedicating my life to ever since. Here at City Square, we, over the years, have been blessed to receive enough support to provide over 700 units of permanent supportive housing annually to persons coming out of homelessness here in Dallas. So that's my story.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing the story. And last but not least, Counselor Huron, go ahead. I believe you're on mute.
How about that? Better?
There we go.
Okay. Ed is being very, very modest when he says he just takes pictures. Ed is actually a professional photographer, and City Square has some of the best ID badges around when Ed is doing the pictures. So that's why Larry was asking him to take the pictures. Personally, I got a lot of shock value when I came to work for City Square. I'm one of the lawyers who works for the Law Center, and let me thank the Dallas Young Lawyers Association for their support of the Law Center over the past couple of years. We really appreciate what you guys are doing for us. We do pro bono and sliding fee scale legal representation. The most of it is family law that comes in the door, but we're just one small part of City Square. And let me just share this slide real quick if I can make this work. City Square, you guys never see this? The screen?
Sharing, yes.
Okay, so we have 17 different social services. We have 7 different housing programs. That's the small job that Ed has. We have several food programs, work programs, healthcare programs, legal assistance, and then we also have the track program for the kids aging out of foster care. And when Ed talks about how complicated the homeless situation is, part of the reason we have all these services is because we found that without having all these different options for people to get help from different areas, you don't fully address the homeless problem. For me, it was when we moved into 511 North Ackerd that things really hit home to me. City Square bought the building next to the T. Boone Pickens YMCA and proceeded to try and arrange multi-level use. So the bottom floor is retail, the next 2 floors are office, and then floors 4 through 13 are subsidized housing, and the roof is market rate condominiums. And in that process, they were negotiating with the city to get units for formerly homeless people to move into. And what we went through with the city to just get 50 units was astounding, because you wouldn't think there would be that resistance when you see what's around you, looking around downtown in South Dallas. And, you know, I've heard of other developers also having the same issues, and you begin to realize that there's a system that you have to overcome to be able to address the problem, because there is this resistance, and it just floors me when you look around and see what the obvious problem is. And there was neighbors downtown, who I shall not name, who weren't thrilled about us moving in because we were bringing down the neighborhood's property values. But every day I go to work and I'm there in the building with these neighbors of ours. And I see their lives and I see where they've come and how happy they are to have a place to live and how much that means to them. And that's what really drove it home to me.
Thank you for sharing. Mr. Eason mentioned the complicated nature of this problem, and that brings me to an article that the Washington Post published back in 2015. Some of you might recall. It was entitled "The Homeless Men Who Went to Harvard with John Roberts." And it was a story about, his name is Alfred Postel, and he's in New York, and he suffers from schizophrenia. He has one accounting degree, one in economics, and one in law. And yet he lives on the streets. And I wanted to bring that up because, of course, the complexity of the issue, but then also wanted to know from your experience, what are the causes of homelessness in Dallas, in addition to mental health? If you can please elaborate, and anyone please.
Well, I'll be happy to start. And I think that what causes homelessness is when something happens to a household that destabilizes it without the appropriate support network to hold it up. And so for families, that might look like the rent's gone up $100 a month, a domestic violence issue, a child is seriously ill. Maybe a child has a chronic health condition. And so if it's a single parent household, there's only so many times you can go call out sick for work to go get your kid from school to bring them home, right? So kids with seizure disorders and severe autism and all these complicating factors can destabilize quickly a family that doesn't have enough of a support network. We've seen the effects of mass incarceration. We see families who are paying too much of their income towards their rent. So one little thing that goes wrong, a car breaking down, could be the thing that destabilizes that family. So it's a myriad of issues, but the bottom line is we have systemic racism, we have, you name it. Homelessness is where all of our failed social policies hit. And when there's no support structure there to hold that household up, it destabilizes.
Yeah,
Judge, I'll jump in on this as well. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed.
Go ahead, Ms. Mendelson.
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that sometimes I would tell people it's a series of unfortunate events. Right? It's not generally one thing that will cause someone to be homeless. It's the whole series of things. And some of those are people who are very stable and the series happens and you can kind of quickly get them back to independence. But for others, it's, you know, generational poverty and some really significant issues of addiction and mental health that need longer term support and longer term interventions to help them regain that stability. I think Ed said earlier that homelessness is complicated, and sometimes we make it simple by just calling it homelessness, but it's not one thing. And so I'll often tell people, if you think of homelessness as a block, you can't say, I want to treat the block. You have to take slices off, because part of homelessness is mental health. Okay, that's one block. Part of it is, you know, Ellen just said racism. That's one element. Part of it is a rejection of people who are gay. That's another element. Part of it is a breakdown in family structure. That's another. I mean, so there's so many different pieces. There's not one solution. And certainly there's a lot of things that just this pandemic has shown us, that places where society was already very fragile, and it's really blatant right now. And homelessness is not new for Dallas. It's not a new issue. It's not a new obstacle we're trying to work on, but it's really in our face right now. And maybe that's good, because there's a lot of attention on it right now. So I'll just say, what causes it? It's not one thing. It's so many different things. And every single person who's been homeless has their own individual story even if you can kind of categorize them in a lot of different buckets. But there's not an answer, not a single answer anyhow. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe, I agree with what Ellen and the council member Mendelson has said. I think the root causes of homelessness are more related to poverty than anything else. I mean, we not only allow poverty to exist, we've engineered the inequalities that produce poverty into our society. The problem really is housing or healthcare. The problem is us. We're so polarized, we can't talk to one another. We're so stressed and unhappy. We feel immobilized to act, and we stereotype and blame each other to the point that we don't seek nor find common ground on which to build. The way you end homelessness is through an effective homeless response system. And I'm really proud of what our city is doing. I'm working in our continuum of care to make that a better system to deal with homelessness. I think we can do it. It's just systemic, not only within its own system, but it's systemic in our larger system in which it exists.
And I'll just piggyback in talking about the systems and the mental health situation. I don't think that we can underestimate the extent to which mental health issues end up perpetuating homelessness. And then you add on to it other systemic blocks, like if you have a criminal record. So we have an entire group of housing called Hickory Crossing, which is a group of cottages. And that population specifically is those with mental illness and criminal records, because those criminal records and that situation disqualify them for housing assistance in any other scenario. And those are the kind of systemic blocks that keep people homeless once they reach that point. The same way that what I was talking about with our building, and how there are developers and people who want to build housing for homeless, but they hit blocks with the city as to where you can put them and what you can do and how many you can have. And you know, these are the things that maintain the homelessness. And I think that's something that system-wide has to be overcome.
Thank you. And I did want to address the criminal record component. And if there's anyone who can expand on maybe what attorneys can do in terms of volunteering hours to help some of these individuals potentially expunge certain records, or help them obtain a state ID or local ID. Do you work with, in addition to DAYL, of course, you work with any other groups of attorneys who are willing to offer pro bono hours?
We do some disclosures and expungements from our office, and we also work on, I know as a city square has programs to assist with IDs and obtaining driver's license again. That's a huge thing. People have issues with driver's license just because they owe fees places that they can't afford to pay, and we work on trying to negotiate those and get them paid off for them, help them get them paid off. That goes a long way to helping people get jobs and get out of the situation of homelessness. Expungements and non-disclosures are huge, because most people think if they do defer that things automatically fall off their record. They don't. You actually have to take the affirmative action to get things off your record. And that is something I think the Young Lawyers Program, DVAP, and programs like that are trying to address regularly.
That is great to hear. And I'm sure that for those watching, if you haven't joined DAYL's groups, Ms. Harris or Raju or Maria will let you know how to join. I know that we have some law school students watching. A couple of them are my interns, and I know that they truly care about these issues. I did want to ask the panel about what Councilwoman Mendelson framed as the general poverty, homelessness, or maybe what I might call chronic homelessness, versus a series of events that lead to homelessness, where eventually the families will be able to become more stable and no longer require homelessness services. A friend of mine shared with me the eviction lab out of Princeton University. And according to this site, they've mapped the country, and of course they've created some data, and it seems that according to them, 1.5 people are evicted each year in the United States. And their prediction is that given this pandemic, 28 million people will be evicted this year. And that is essentially saying that 8% of the population of this country will suffer an eviction. And one of the questions I wanted to ask each of you is, are we prepared as a city to handle an additional 10,000 homeless individuals or families?
Hi. Well, nobody's ever going to be prepared to handle 10,000 people who've been evicted. I mean, that's not even possible. But I want to add another number to you, because it's interesting to hear what's happening around the country, and certainly I follow it closely, but I think that we have to really focus on what's happening right here in Dallas. In the last 5 years, we've had a 500% increase in unsheltered homeless. 500%. So this isn't even anything to do with COVID. When we talk about the impact that COVID's going to have on the homeless, it's going to be really sharp, I believe. And so I'd love to tell you some of the things that the city is doing to address that. So first off, when the pandemic hit, we opened up the Kay Bailey Hutchinson Convention Center to anybody. And we did that for a couple of reasons. The CDC put out guidelines for our overnight shelters that they had to have the beds 6 feet apart. And that's not what was happening in the shelters. And that meant they could have a reduced capacity. So right away, shelters that were sheltering, X number of hundred could do a lot less. So we pulled, first of all, over 100 people out of the shelters and put them in a hotel. These are people that the shelter operators said were ready for housing. They just didn't have a place to go, whether they had a voucher and they couldn't find an apartment or whatever the scenario was, they were ready for housing. So they are still in a motel room, and we're providing meals for them all the time, 3 meals a day. And that's been going on since March. So you can imagine the commitment that the city has made for those 100 people. The convention center has operated on average about 375 people a night. And again, that was to relieve the capacity from the overnight shelters. We disbanded an encampment that was happening about 145 people outside the library, the downtown library, also got them at the convention center, which it had meals and showers, it has medical care, and it's a secure facility. The other thing that we were able to do at the convention center was actually put all of those people in our homeless management information system. In Dallas, which includes Collin County as our continuum of care, we get HUD funding based on a number of criteria. One of them is our participation in the HMIS system. We've been one of the lowest performing continuums of care in the country. This has been going on for a long time. 10 years ago, when I served on the leadership committee for the continuum of care, we received about $16 million from HUD. Today, we get just about $16 million from HUD. Nobody else in the country has maintained that number. Everybody else has increased. So we're not performing at the level to get the funding we need to actually solve and help enough people. So the city has taken this big leadership position in the past year. I want to tell you that we immediately made funding available for the emergency shelters, $1.5 million, because we knew they were having extraordinary expenses with personal protection gear, with providing day services. So a lot of our overnight shelters would close during the day. They don't staff it, but now we're saying, hey, shelter in place, we need people to stay inside. They were adding additional staff. So we wanted to make sure they had the funding to be able to operate. The next thing that we've done is something that I actually think is extraordinary. And I'm so proud of Dallas for doing this. which is we've made a commitment to add 300 units of rapid rehousing. And the people who've been staying at the convention center, their priority, we're using MDHA's priority housing list, but 300 units of rapid rehousing in essentially 3.5 months, that challenge has never been done in Dallas. Dallas has never made that kind of commitment, even in a year, let alone we're looking to do this by September 30th. So I'm really proud of it. I think that we've looked at it in a pretty innovative way. The next thing that's happened is the city has said, we will open a homeless facility in every single council district. So for a long time, we've heard the cry of homelessness is being concentrated downtown. And I will tell you, and I know my colleagues who are on this call will say, there are homeless services needed that don't even exist in the city. So I'll give you the example of, we don't have homeless hospice care. When a homeless individual is discharged from a hospital, they have nowhere to go to get the kind of care you would get from your mom, right? Where someone's going to bring you meals, check on you, maybe help you change the dressing. None of the homeless providers are prepared to do that kind of work. If somebody's at end of life, the homeless facilities are not prepared to staff in that way. We need that kind of shelter. There's a lot of other holes in the continuum. Family Gateway does a wonderful job serving families, but they're the only one. I mean, they are the real shelter. That's it. But we're a very large city and we serve a large region. So I will tell you, in my district, in District 12.
And let me interject there, Councilwoman, because I did want to hear from the other panelists regarding.
You bet.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So, of course, we've heard that we're likely not prepared if we were to have to house a new cohort of about 10,000 new homeless families. I did want to hear from Mr. Eason and Ms. Magnus regarding how they'll approach the issue when it comes to their door. And then the other thing I wanted to ask the panelists, well, actually, let me leave it at that for now. Go ahead, Mr. Eason.
You want me to go first? Okay, so we're preparing for it now. What's been interesting for family homelessness during the beginning of this pandemic is that because of the eviction bans and because of the extra money that has been flowing through from unemployment, we've actually seen a suppression of calls to our hotline. But all the calls that are coming through are critical. Usually we get a big mix of non-critical with critical. So we're seeing fewer calls, but they're much more urgent than ever before. We've seen a suppression of evictions because of the eviction ban. And we have seen a greater percentage of families who are coming to us who've been living in hotels from week to week because they're not protected under the eviction ban. So what we're trying to do now is staff up, gear up, get our hands on as much money as possible for housing through the city, through the state, through the federal government, as well as making sure that we have some unrestricted dollars available for eviction prevention for when the pockets of restricted dollars get sucked into the marketplace, because that's going to happen quickly. And we're trying to move people out of our overflow hotel and out of our shelter as quickly as possible to make room for more. And we're starting to work also now with our landlords who we have deep relationships with, who we will be putting families into their empty units. We're asking them to help us identify the families who are at risk of eviction so that we can keep them stabilized so that they don't come flowing into shelter. But there's certainly not enough of that going to happen to deal with this surge that's coming.
Yeah, at City Square, we very quickly on, we decided that we were not going to shut down our programs that serve the homeless. We early on just made the declaration that those programs were essential. They were going to keep going. Our street outreach has actually almost doubled the number of engagements that it's made with the unsheltered homeless. And we've diverted about 30% of those persons that would have stayed in the system to other housing options. And then also we, through our grant through the city of Dallas and some other partners, provide the Dallas Connector, which is a free shuttle service. We've kept that going. We've kept that, we've equipped all of our staff with PPE, got them out there operating those vehicles and moving individuals every day from the convention center to other places where they can get food and where they can access services. And finally, we've taken kind of a two-prong approach. We were the recipients of a grant from the city of Dallas last fall for 75 units of rapid rehousing. And Ellen and I, through Family Gateway and City Square working together, even in the midst of this pandemic, have housed over 77 households, mostly led by women, and containing, I think about a third of them have children in them. We were able to place those households into rapid rehousing. And we've committed to Kevin Oden, the director of Office of Homeless Solutions at the city, to house another 13 between now and the end of September and exceed our goal of 75 units of rapid rehousing. So we are doing what we can. We're ready. Within the continuum of care, what people don't realize is that in addition to the 300 units that the city has made available through their funding, the continuum of care last year expanded the $16 million that comes from HUD to include more rapid rehousing. And so in addition to those 300 units coming from the city, there will be this fall rolling out an additional 200 to 300 units of rapid rehousing. So we do have more rapid rehousing than ever before. Yes, it's taken a while to ramp it up, but will it be enough to handle an increase of 10,000 new homeless people? No, but at least we're, as far as the future funding for rapid rehousing, we're in better condition than we were a year ago.
Thank you. And before I change the topic, I did want to ask Ms. Magnus earlier on when she was sharing how she knew that her heart was going to be in helping alleviate homelessness. She mentioned that destabilizing events are really the root causes of homelessness. And one of the questions that I think is very dear to our audience is the question of the role of property taxes and cost of living on homelessness. And if Ms. Magnus and Ms. Mendelsohn could address that.
Sure. Well, I think everybody knows that the research says that where you grow up in your zip code is a determining factor in your success, right? So if you are in a concentrated area of poverty where the tax base is non-existent, where home ownership is almost non-existent, those are sort of self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating generational centers of poverty, right? So we know that is deeply effective. And so if all you know when you're growing up is abject poverty, where every third person has been incarcerated, all of these things drive your opinion of yourself and what you can accomplish, right? And so I think that's all very interconnected. And for the families we serve, they make 0 to 30% of the area median income. They're mostly hourly workers without sick pay benefits, right? And so when you have this sort of disparity in income and it's impossible to sort of pull yourself up, there are no bootstraps on those boots. You can't just figure it out, right? You need some help to keep moving on. So I think poverty and the tax base and all of that is quite interrelated. I'm sure Kara has more.
Well, I'll just say that historically the city has completely underfunded the issue of homelessness. And I think I've been advocating for a greater percentage of our budget to serve people are experiencing homelessness so that we can end their particular homelessness, and we can have the systems in place for the variety of needs that occur. In addition to the one-time funding that we continually allocate, what we need is a continuous stream of income. And we need to make sure that we are growing our smaller nonprofits that are doing incredible work on the ground, that our medium-sized nonprofits get larger and stronger so that they can then do some of the work to accommodate. We've had a couple of nonprofits dominating Dallas, and that has not served our city well. And you know, when you look at comparable cities, we've got a very different kind of model happening in Dallas. And what that's meant is that we've got big holes. So in Dallas, most of the beds, the majority of beds are for homeless sheltering are controlled by faith-based organizations who do not accept city funding or the requirements that the city puts on it. So there's a number of factors that are sort of structural. When you talk about the property tax, I'm assuming that's what you're saying about, you know, how the funding comes back to this issue. Most people who are homeless are not paying property taxes. Most people who are living in poverty are not directly paying property taxes, but are certainly paying it through their rent. And as we are about to approach budget season, like next week, property taxes are a big discussion. We had an option in Dallas to be able to increase property taxes up to 8% because of the disaster declarations. And frankly, we took that off the table, and I'm so glad we did. That would have been, to me, another disaster for the city. We can't afford to do that. We've got to hold the line on our tax base because we need those dollars to let people self-support themselves. I mean, it can't be that we're overtaxing people and then we're using those tax dollars to then go back and serve them. We want people to be able to keep their money and make the choices for themselves. But as a city, yeah, we're underfunding this issue. And I expect we'll have a very robust discussion about that.
Thank you very much. And I know that the committees wanted to also open it up for questions for members of the public. And before I open it up for questions, Ms. Huron, will you like to comment on how COVID might have changed the homelessness landscape?
Well, I think it's not so much a question of how it's already changed it, it's how it's going to change it. We're looking at a lot of issues with our housing, with these evictions that are coming up. Hang on a second, I'm sorry, I was trying to get a slide up here real quick. Apologize, I'm not the most tech savvy on this stuff. Can you guys see this?
Perfect.
So this is the stat federally about the moratorium that's ended July 24th. About 30% of all renters nationwide were affected by the ending of the moratorium. And then we also had the federal unemployment supplement end as well, which for Texas ended July 25th, even though the program technically ends July 31st due to the way the payments are structured. So there's a lot that are being hit simultaneously. Locally, we found that about 10% of the renters in high rent properties and 25% of those in low rent properties are not making their current payments. And even though the Dallas County Justice has a piece of delayed hearings until August 6th, that's a really short time span considering that Saturday is August already. So these are the reasons, and I put these up because I know a lot of lawyers, and myself included, didn't understand exactly all the factors that are working against people as these evictions are coming up. It's not just that they don't have the money, it's, you know, that they're more likely to have lost jobs because their jobs are not suitable for remote work. They're unable to continue working because they don't have childcare. That's a big issue, especially with the schools not going back. I know I have two, and I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Lack of access to medical care, lack of access to having any kind of savings. And then finally, and this is a big one, the negative credit and negative rental histories that people have previously because of previous unemployment or previous evictions, which will label them high risk and make it difficult to negotiate with landlords as these evictions are starting to happen. So these are all things that we're seeing that are, are going to make this bubble really blow up as we go forward. I do family law over at the law center for the most part. We're seeing it in connection with our family law cases as well. When we've got mothers who aren't, weren't previously working, now looking to get divorced, don't know where to go, don't know where to live, have resources for kids. It's affecting a lot of areas of the services that we provide, not just the housing. But what I did want to mention, and this is something that I thought was really cool, and this is the cool part of working for City Square, I get to hear about what everybody else is doing besides myself. And Ed can talk more on this. We have a program that just came online to help make up the difference in rent. So it's not just providing rent from zero, it's providing the additional rent to get you out of one zip code and into another zip code, going back to what Alan was speaking about how that makes such a difference what zip code you grow up in. And I think more programs like that to address, the difference in helping people get out of the situation they're in are needed across the board.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Raju. He's got several interesting questions from the audience. Go ahead, Raju.
Thanks, Judge, and thanks again to this panel for what's been an incredible event. So we got several questions from the group, and I'll try to summarize them into one question because I think they kind of all get to the same thing. Today, all of you have articulated some bases or some causes of homelessness, everything from property rights to COVID to poverty and mental health. And so the questions that we have are kind of twofold. The first is, what can people do to help, both directly on a long-term basis, and what can people do, especially attorneys, on a short-term or maybe one-off basis? If they don't have time to dedicate an entire year, for instance, to solving this crisis, what can they do on a piecemeal basis to help?
I'll take the attorney question real quick. If y'all are looking for some place to help, Dallas Evictions 2020 is organizing attorneys to help with evictions. And it's not so much that you necessarily have to commit to handle eviction cases. There's a lot of people who just need advice. Who just need to know whether or not the correct procedure has been followed, who just need to be put in touch with resources. Sometimes just having an attorney on board, talking to the landlord and saying, I'm here to negotiate. Wouldn't some money be better than no money? Wouldn't you like to help keep these people in their house? Would make the difference in those situations. So I would encourage all of y'all, if you're interested, to look at DallasEvictions2020.com. I'm sorry, it's .com. Mark Melton is heading that group, and City Square is going to be a part of that from the Law Center.
I would say that something that everyone can do is get involved as an advocate to fight for solutions to homelessness in your community. So we have a big problem called NIMBY, not in my backyard. So we don't want people sleeping on the streets, and we don't want more shelters, but we also don't want to build more affordable housing or build more shelters in our communities. So every time there's an effort put forth by the city or any other entity to try to take a step forward, there are community members who want to block that. So I say, get out there and speak up for these folks who don't have a voice themselves, and to get involved in being part of the solution rather than saying we can't solve this problem. And I think one of the things that COVID in a positive way has brought to us is an abundance of federal funding. So we're about to have a one-time shot at making a big dent in our homelessness problem. And if we miss this, shame on us.
I've said this before, and other times I've addressed the Dallas Young Lawyers. You, more than anybody else in our city, have the knowledge and the skills, and I think, if not now, eventually in the future, the audience to really do the best education about homelessness than anybody in our communities. You know from your training not to stereotype people. You know from your training not to buy into simplistic perspectives about anything. And if you can help people understand that those experiencing homeless are homelessness are people first, and their experience of homelessness is something that they're in and not some permanent part of their character. I think that you more than anybody else can help educate people about homelessness because of those perspectives you have. You won't let people get away with racial discrimination. Why would you let them get away with discrimination about our citizens that are experiencing homelessness?
So I'm going to be super specific, because the question I hear you asking is, how can you take action after hearing this question? So number one, as I was saying, we're going to have homeless facilities in every single district. This is just now coming up. Tomorrow, I'm hosting a District 12 session on Ask an Expert about family homelessness. So we've got a national expert, and then we've got the homeless liaison from Plano ISD, because the facility we intend to purchase in my district will be within Plano ISD. It's tomorrow. You want to attend, send me an email, we'll send you the link. You want to talk about this issue in front of council, sign up on the city secretary's webpage. We need more residents coming to the council meetings, and it's virtual, saying this is a priority for us. We're about to embark on a $3.8 billion budget. Well, that's what it was before COVID. But it's a lot of money at stake. And if this is a priority, your council members, whether they represent you directly or represent you as part of the city, they need to hear from you that you think this is an important use of your tax dollars. As these facilities are purchased, and it'll be using the CARES funding, as Ellen was talking about, this big shot that we have is to purchase hotels and convert them into facilities. Well, as we do that, we're going to need help in rehabbing them. We'll obviously have professional contractors, but for the facility in my district, which will be a family-oriented one, there's going to be an opportunity for organizations like yours to adopt a room and make it a welcoming space. So I can definitely see, lots of service projects for that in the faith community and civic groups, Eagle Scout projects, you name it. And then, as I mentioned, the evictions, I do think there's going to be a large increase in evictions. I don't think it'll be 10,000 units. And I say that because there's nobody to refill those apartments. The landlords are going to have to negotiate. And they will prefer to have some money over no money. Now, the number that people don't often ask is, well, how many evictions were we already dealing with per year? And it's a lot. It's a big number. So all of that to say, I'm glad that you're interested. I'm glad you want to get involved, and please do. Also, you should I just want to say one other thing. You should contact your council member if you want to serve on a board or commission. A lot of times we're looking for people who want to serve, and you should proactively reach out to the district that you live in, reach out to that council member and say, hey, I am raising my hand. I want to be involved.
No, that was going to be, we had a question precisely about that, so you must have been reading my mind. Thank you for answering a question about serving on city boards. That's great.
We have time for one more question, Raju. I know it's 1:01 p.m.
No, no, thank you, Judge. The last question I had was precisely on city boards, and Ms. Mendelson answered it splendidly. So from what I can see, there's no additional questions from the group. And I think this is a really good time to close things up.
Let me just add one thing. Legal Aid is putting on a seminar tomorrow, I believe at 2 o'clock, for attorneys who are interested in finding out about evictions, renters' rights, and things like that. I do not have the skills to throw up the information on the screen fast enough, but if anybody wants to email me at mherron@citysquare.org, I'm happy to send you the information. They're going to have like 3 or 4 lawyers from Legal Aid putting that on. I believe the city of Dallas is actually hosting that.
Thank you so much to everyone for sharing their savoir-faire and really their insights. I know that this would be a day conversation, if not much longer, for all of us who don't know really the fine aspects of homelessness. One question I did want to ask Mr. Eason that I'm sure we get to talk offline might be, what is rapid housing or rehousing versus a different type of homelessness sheltering. But again, thank you, DAYL, for allowing me to moderate this fantastic panel of subject matter experts. You are all doing a tremendous job out there, and we so appreciate your care and work.
No, thank you, Judge. Thanks to all the panelists. This has been a lot of fun for me, and this is, I think, super educational, and also you guys did such a great job just touching on all the different facets of this problem. It's obviously very dynamic. It's also entrenched in various elements of society, of politics, economics, and you all did such a great job bringing all that together. So thank you all so much. Once again, the CLE code is 174090340. So don't forget, excuse me, to get your CLE. And with that, I have nothing more to add. Thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.